Welcome, everyone, to the third episode of 3. This is the final one on UV technology and sourcing considerations. And today's episode is going to be a little bit more on the what happens after the sale. So episode 1 was UV efficacy and integration. Episode 2, regulatory considerations and product performance. This is the first ever CEC approved UV podcast here on Power Supply, and we're going to be talking about what happens after the purchase. What are the preventable factors that supply chain teams should be considering to ensure that they get the cost savings and fewer transmission events from the implementation of UV technology? And so many times what we're looking for from our supplier relationships is for them to lean in and bring more to the table. So the guests we have today are going to talk all about that, both from the provider side and the supplier side. So Kyle Morrison, System Director for Environmental Services and Food and Nutrition, is going to be joining us, as well as Selena Pfannstiel, Manager of Customer Success at Xenex. So stay with us. We're going to be right back after a short break. Joining me now, Kyle Morrison, System Director for Environmental Services, Food and Nutrition, and Selena Pfannstiel, Manager of Customer Success at Xenex. And we're going to be completing a trilogy of podcasts. We have 3. The last 2 we're talking a lot about considerations for purchasing in supply chain. But now we're going to talk about what happens after you make the purchase and how to make sure that there's successful implementation of UV. So I want to thank you both for coming on. And Kyle, maybe we start with you, and just why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your experience in hospital operations, and what kind of brings you to the conversation today?
Sure. I've been in hospital operations for about 20 years. And as you said, overseeing operations departments, EVS, food and nutrition, patient transport, linen operations. Yeah, all over the country, many different systems of hospitals. And it's UV disinfection, UV technology is something that has always been something I try to champion, regardless of who I'm partnering with, just because it truly makes a difference in many different aspects of our day-to-day work. But yeah, thanks for having me and look forward to diving in.
Yeah, I think it's great to talk to the person who is implementing and utilizing the technology as we kind of do this third installment of the podcast series. And Selena, I want to welcome you to the podcast. You're obviously very familiar with the topic today as well. So your role is customer success. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. It's so nice to be here. Nice to see you, Kyle. I am on a team called Customer Success, and I've been with Xenex. This will be 13 years, and we do all things customer related. So support for customer implementations. We do support for ongoing programs, validation, post-implementation. We do a lot of programming because each program is very specific to that facility. And then as things change, our users are needing to be updated, rooms, units, things like that. We do all of the support for anything they need. We also want to try and listen as much as possible so that we can, with our team here, our marketing team, we want to provide whatever tool is needed for the hospital to be successful as well. So we do all things customer success.
Well, that's great, because if we're going to be talking about what it's like to implement the technology after the sale and how to be successful, customer success is at the heart of that. And we did talk a lot about it in the first 2 episodes too, in terms of like, what should sourcing considerations be? Because, it's not just a matter of evaluating cost. It's also like, what support are you going to get? Hospitals are asking a lot more of their suppliers today than they might have 20 years ago. And so I think we're going to highlight a lot of that. And leading into that discussion, Kyle, I'd like to start with you and just kind of talk about, I realize you had been, somebody that's advocated for UV for many years. You probably have advocated prior to your current role in your current organization as well. But what typically leads hospitals that you're working at and you in your role to start evaluating UV technology?
I think regardless of where you're at, it's about taking that safety, patient safety, staff safety, but also quality of care to the next level. I think UV technology, UV disinfection is the next step. Once you've established your cleaning regimens, your disinfection regimens, ultraviolet disinfection is the next step to almost just ensure that you're getting the results you need, whether it comes from HAIs, whether it comes with SSIs in the surgery departments, or whether it comes supporting our water flows. There's so many things that UV can do that I think for a long time it was out of reach for a lot of healthcare systems, whether it was just the lack of knowledge or the expense. It's far easier to establish that and work that into your daily procedures and processes, not just in operations department, but in all departments, because it just increases the level of service, care, and quality that you can provide. And it's a fraction of the time.
And infection prevention is like a top priority, right? I mean, just since
Absolutely.
Reimbursement models changed and everything else, I feel like we finally got a real laser focus over the last decade and a half on infection prevention. And just look at the IP world, which you obviously support too, but just the demand for IP professionals has grown substantially. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. And it's again, you touched on it especially with infection control. Any way we can eliminate human error, that's the kind of technology we want to invest in, but also utilize every day, because it does. It's the human error portion in everything we do is apparent. It's going to happen. So to limit that risk, that's the first step to it is something as easy as implementing UV and that technology.
So obviously we're talking to supply chain professionals today. That's the audience that we're speaking with. And I think a conversation or a topic or a theme that comes up a lot lately is speed to value. And I think hospitals in sourcing can be very resource constrained as well. They've got to prioritize different initiatives. And at the same time, the hospital knows that they have to move quickly to bring on, new methodologies and new products and new services to keep up with the increasing financial pressures. And so speed to value is this theme. Now, what we're about to talk about, though, is capital equipment purchasing. And I don't think the experience for department leaders is that is a very fast process. It's a long process. And I wondered, what advice could you give the supply chain folks that are listening around, from a department leader's perspective, that whole capital purchasing process, like how to set up everybody for success and maybe get that speed to value?
I think one of the first things, and obviously, once again, just like ultraviolet technology, the technology in supply chain to get things done quicker, more efficiently, technology. There are various capital programs out there, as opposed to walking around a hospital and seeing 10 different department leaders and needing to get a signature and justify your purchase 10 different times. To be able to put it in a database that supply chain has access to, infection control, IT, biomedical engineering, administration. There's tons of great programs out there, and I've been privy to using a handful of them now, and it's really sped up the process, because it's one thing to get approval to spend the capital dollars. The next thing is going through the arduous process of 10 approvals, the justification that turns out to be 15 pages. None of us have time for that anymore. So the technology end of it is probably the best support I've seen, via cloud or however you'd like to look at it. And that's helped us tremendously, just to get everybody on the same page, the same board. And it's not a 2-hour capital meeting anymore, because all the info is in front of them. And you don't have 50 people in the room all wanting their piece and their time to talk, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I feel like if I've worked on both sides, I've worked as a provider and I've worked as a supplier. And I remember just the size of the teams and just coordinating schedules is work. I mean, it's a big job trying to get everybody there. And at some point, somebody says, let's just have the meeting anyway. And then the people that couldn't go end up being upset that they weren't involved in the decision making. And that's a constant challenge, I think. Asynchronous decision making is definitely an opportunity. But But let's talk about like supply chain and involvement. I mean, I'm sure they're involved a lot, but how early are they involved? Like what typically when it comes to UV purchasing decisions, what's typically the timeline that supply chain engages with you, or do you bring it to them in your capital budgeting process?
That's largely I want to get to them first, because the more people, especially when it comes to supply chain, that you can gain their support before you go it to the end decision maker, which usually is your administrators, your vice presidents, those kind of folks. The sooner you can get in with supply chain, talk through, why we're doing this, what the purchase is, and they can start doing their research as well, because, they're the experts when it comes to finding companies that are out there, finding companies that are involved with your purchasing group. Sure, I can meet a rep at any trade show or anywhere I go, but to get them involved early, I think that's what's been very beneficial in my experience because at that point, it's not me pushing the boulder up the hill myself. It's very, very few and far between that I haven't been able to sit down with a supply chain leader and explain to them, this is why we want to do this. And let me show you the benefits and the reasons, to where they're kind of not in the fight with me after that point. So.
Do you ever take a land and expand approach, where you sort of get the technology in and start to show its benefits and then go back and say, okay, now that I've shown you this, we need to expand utilization so that I can repeat this for the organization because the benefits are obvious. Do you find yourself in those conversations too?
Absolutely. And if you find a partner or technology out there that will allow you to do that as well, let's trial this for a month. Let's put this in place for 2 to 3 weeks. Huge benefit. And I know there's quite a bit out there that will do that, but absolutely, when you have tangible results, tangible data that you can put in front of not just supply chain but anybody, I mean that makes it tremendously easier. To your point, Justin.
Yeah, and it's great to have a partner that would be flexible, like you were saying, to help you sort of make the case before all of a sudden capital dollars are committed. Right? You kind of sometimes get into that catch-22. Or, the deer in the headlights. It's like, oh, we want to make the move, but we can't quite move. And, I think helping get over that hurdle is just one of the ways, that a partner can help you get that speed to value. So, Selena, let's talk to you about that operational support and bringing that back into the conversation for supply chain. So let's say, somebody comes to them and says, I want to implement UV technology. Maybe they don't have prior experience with that like Kyle does. And they come over to supply chain. At the end of the day, what happens afterwards is super important. So what should they be thinking about as they evaluate UV technology suppliers and companies to sort of identify, do they have a partner that is going to help them implement or even continue the success from a small trial, right? And then they have to, that's great. We did it in a small case, but how do we show this on a grand scale? Because, there's a learning curve for people to use a new technology that comes into the health system.
Absolutely. So I do think sticking with that value-based theme, which was very interesting and something new that I hadn't heard before. So I find that very interesting. But I think that as a supply chain, understanding the regulations, because they've changed recently. And so if they're looking at UV and they're looking at using it in patient rooms or operating rooms, just investing in something that does not meet like regulatory requirements. So that would be first and foremost, understanding that, validating any claims, but then asking themselves or the vendor, is service included? And then what does support cover? Like what is covered with the support program and for how long? Because that's very important. And then do you have flexible models? Because each completely different. So having flexible models that they can choose from, and then whether or not they need full service or limited support would be based on what their needs are. So we really try to work with them and come up with a program that's going to best benefit them so they can be successful.
So we kind of alluded to this, but the financial pressures and that shrinking hospital margins. So capital, especially because of the time that goes into it, because of the resources and because of the size of the purchase, it just receives a lot of scrutiny. This is kind of to both of you. Maybe Kyle, you can start, but what helps to make those purchasing decisions be a little bit easier?
And I think, we've talked about support from administration and other hospital leaders. I think one of the methods I've been able to use in the past is get as many departments on board as possible, as many department leaders as possible. At that point, when you've got clinical folks, when you've got operations, when you have, again, finance, supply chain, when they see the benefits, and whether that's you bringing a device to their office, you allowing them, I'll be honest with you, Justin, I've gone as far as taking a unit to our director of finance's house because she was interested in it, and we ultravioleted her whole house just so she could see and experience what it was like. I think the other piece too, from a patient buy-in standpoint, is really sharing with the patients why you're using UV when you're in the room cleaning and disinfecting every day, to share that, and then to ultimately start seeing comments from patients, whether it's via HCAPS or other opinion sharing websites, to start seeing comments or positive reactions from that. It's the most powerful buy-in we can get, is when our customers all of a sudden are noticing what we're doing. It's made a huge difference. I mean, that's the buy-in from everyone before you get in there is helped me tremendously personally with many different supply chains, many different administration teams.
I love your creative approach to executive leadership buy-in. That's amazing. Selena, how about your perspective? Like how do you make these purchasing decisions easier on everyone involved?
Well, I think Kyle mentioned this, but I think when the vendor gets multi-departments together, right? When we get environmental services and infection control, we establish like champions, operational champions and clinical champions. I think having the buy-in from the hospital before it gets to supply chain is crucial. It's going to make the process much faster. I think understanding, like we talked about the regulatory requirements, but understanding what happens at implementation and post-implementation, what kind of tools you have so that you can track progress. Because with a program like this, you're not buying just a product, you're buying a program. So you need the support to make sure it's successful. And then you just want to make sure that you have the right integration. You want to make sure there's enough training. So I think you just have to present the best possible program that's already thought through before it gets to the supply chain folks, so that they don't have to justify it with other groups in the hospital. The other groups are already involved. So I do think Kyle mentioned that as well. But I think from a vendor standpoint, also getting those folks involved, because it does affect all departments. It affects, the hospital employees. It affects the patients. So there is just a huge program you're building specific for that hospital that you can provide to supply chain so that they have a decision to make that's easier.
I think you just made some supply chain fans with that. Just coming prepared and helping the hospital build out something thoughtful, because even if you're talking to a department leader, they might know what they want to do, but if they don't have a prior experience, they might not be able to put that plan together. And so when we talk about vendors and suppliers leaning into the relationship, that's really what we're talking about, right? Is helping give them the resources so that everybody can have confidence that they can be successful with this. So let's talk about reality. Okay. So now the decision's been made. You prepared for it. Supply chain says, okay, I think they've checked off all the boxes, but now it's go live. It's happening. And we got a lot of work to do. Kyle, how are you evaluating whether or not the company has delivered on what they promised in the beginning, like out of the gate, from communication to actually doing what they said they would with implementation to, sort of even engaging your own team for them to adopt the technology? Like, how do you kind of quantify that?
I think, and you touched on a lot of it, the communication, the support during the process should be an eye-opener for you, number one. But like you said, just like anything else, if I buy this, am I now just said, here, that you're on your own? I think with evaluating partnerships is, there's things you can evaluate right after the decision's been made or right before. That's something with, warranties. What does the support look like on the back end 5 years from now? Was this warranty still stand? What does it mean? I think right out of the gate, the partnership begins off the data. There's a lot of different technology out there, and being able to have tangible data in front of you that you can utilize to show different departments. But also while you're showing those departments, you're bringing the celebration, if you will, of this technology to different meetings. Having a partner who's willing to be on there with you, and not on there to necessarily give you give a sales pitch. We've already made the sale. Now it's about celebrating what the partnership has produced. And I think I say that, Justin, because I think that brings value to the partner and their company as well. Because getting out there and really sharing the success together, this is not a one-way street. I can't stress that enough. To implement this kind of technology and this kind of process, you have to have a good partner who is there for you, who is willing to answer your phone in the middle of the day. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and can you pick up the phone and call me at 8 p.m. because I've got a staff member who has an issue? All those resources are ones you can definitely vet before you get to the purchasing point. Really, it's just as much on me to keep my partner engaged as it is for, I personally believe for that partner to stay engaged. This is a big investment oftentimes. And yeah, I would say it's on both parties to hold each other accountable with that.
I love that you said hold each other accountable. A lot of times people think that's a one-way street, and it is important to hold each other accountable. It's like, hey, if you want this to work, if you're communicating what everybody's expectations are, everybody's got to meet those. I want to go back to your recent implementation, because that's really there's a little bit of a success story discussion in here. And so I'd be interested if you could talk a little bit about facing challenges, integrating UV into your, daily processes and workflows. I mean, again, there's a big change management piece here. How did that go for you?
You have different hurdles, right? Unfortunately, and fortunately, however way you want to look at it, with unions, with various different departments utilizing UV, it starts with the education, as we've already said, Selena and I both. It starts with the buy-in at the beginning, but to include, if you do happen to be at a union facility, and I think one of the things that's come up in the past for me is we need to add more labor to operate this. And it's really, once again, partnering with your partner to come in and find creative ways to implement this kind of technology without putting the burden necessarily just on your EVS department or your facilities department. When you can generate the engagement and give creative ways to use UV, we've gone as far, We've gone as far as set up rooms where people can put their lunch bags, their shoes, their badges, their phones into a patient room and let them use it for a day, where they can UV all their personal belongings, but also some of their equipment on the floor. Or it's just a way of getting people excited about it. And believe me when I tell you, when they understand the technology, you can also share with them while they're going in and doing it. They feel better about going home to their families that day. I think you have to generate excitement, but more than anything else, and this sounds like a very generic statement, but it's absolutely true. You have to give everybody the why. That's the day and age we're in. They have to get the why. They have to understand the why. And the best way to do that is be visual, be upfront, be transparent, and more importantly, let them use it. Let them screw up. Let them, you know what I mean? Let them, it's so impactful when all of a sudden you see a light bulb go off and the person who might be pushing back on using it all of a sudden understands this is the impact it could have for me. And I don't want to sound too generic with that, but I can't stress that enough. There's so many hurdles you can avoid when rolling out or implementing a UV program by just really letting people use the machines, understand the why, and then letting them and celebrating the results.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. I've heard of people talking about trying to utilize AI, and everybody's like, tell me how to do it. And it's like, that's actually not how it works. You just have to go have an experience with it, and then you will start to use it however it makes sense for you. And I know it's not quite that same with UV, but I think the point about, letting them experience what the technology is accomplishing, because it's not necessarily easy to see, right? And so getting them exposed to it so that they can understand the mission of implementing that technology is so important. And I'll even kind of put this one over to you, Selena, because I'm just thinking about that's not just something that you can do one time. Like, hey, we bring it in UV and everybody's going to like use it and get exposed to it. And then we're all going to be set and we're never going to have to expose it to people again. It absolutely is going to happen. There's going to be turnover all the time. So like, how about that retraining and training that needs to occur as well to keep everybody focused on leveraging the technology to its max?
Absolutely. And what I would suggest is that when you're vetting a vendor, make sure they have some sort of training library. So you want to be able to have you want to have access to training topics that are relevant to the user that is standing right in front of you, right? So we've taken a lot of input from customers and based on what their needs were, and we've created this big training library where you can go in at your own time and view the training video of your choice, right? But this is also super helpful because although not every hospital has high turnover, but I've seen that across the country since 2020, the turnover is just crazy. So as you're onboarding a new user, just having them set through a few videos to see what it does and why it works, how it works is very important. And then you have third shift, right? So you have folks working in the middle of the night that may have limited educational support. So having this library where they can go in and look at training topics at their convenience is really important. And then making sure a vendor has live virtual training so it can happen immediately, or you can have on-site support. We try to get to our customers as often as possible, but just making sure you do have that type of support whether you need it on-site, whether you need it virtual right now, or you need some videos that you can, just access at your will.
Let's talk about reporting and compliance, Kyle. Like, simply, we just talked about it. It's like sometimes it may not be obvious it's working. How do you know your UV technology is working?
Again, I think to what Selena just mentioned is the data and the support. If I pick up the phone because I think I have an issue, to have somebody who will answer and someone who can log into the machine or get on a video call to walk us through, hey, this is happening. What does this mean? Again, it's the 24-hour support, if you will. I think it's the technology of the machine. Is there safety mechanisms on it? Will it tell us, hey, this cycle was interrupted, or alert you on your phone, alert you in your email, alert you on the machine that this unit wasn't successful or this run wasn't successful. We need to go back and do that. And then that same time being able to go online and look from the day before or even within the minute. Hey, I'm looking at it right now. That machine, something got interrupted. We need to go back up and make sure we do that one again, just to make sure we meet our protocols, meet our processes. And so having that at your fingertips at all times, whether it's the unit itself, data itself, a website itself, a person to support, all four of those simultaneously. I mean, that's your royal flush, right? Those are all things that are beneficial, and quite frankly, all things that are that should be included if you're using a device or using technology that is literally targeted towards patient and staff safety. You've got to have that support 24 hours a day, whenever needed, so you can continue to run a successful program.
So we were talking about that kind of mutual accountability. And so, Kyle, you were talking about, all right, this is how I'm going to know that the UV technology I purchased is working correctly. But Selena, I'm going to kind of go back the other side of that and say, how do they know their staff is using it properly? How do you know that the program is working properly? And as somebody who's leading customer success, that's obviously important to you.
Yeah, so I can't tell you who said it, but at one point somebody said to me, in God we trust, everybody else should bring data. And that is truly a real statement. We have a data available at any time. Like Kyle said, you can look at it hour by hour. But I think there was a story that happened this week that I thought I'd share with you guys. A hospital called in and they had some pathogen that they were really worried about. And they wanted to know specifically if the robot was used in this specific room on this specific date. So we were able to go in and look for those two rooms and be able to provide a report so that they could present it to infection control. And then after that, we came up with a completely new plan for them to kind of combat this pathogen transmission issue. So I think things like that is what Kyle's talking about, is just having visibility, having someone to help you kind of drill down into the data to find exactly what you're looking for. And then with a new program is looking at it, maybe weekly at first. You want to look at it weekly to make sure you're hitting those targets and then hitting them correctly as well. So there's like a compliance feature in there as well as user compliance. So Kyle mentioned about, giving accolades to some users. You can certainly identify who is knocking it out of the park, but you might also be able to see someone that's struggling that might need refresher training. So the data will tell you exactly what's going on and it tells us how to fix it. And we certainly help our partners figure that out and get them on the right track.
Let's dive a little bit deeper on that, because even as we were preparing for this episode, both of you mentioned to me discharge data and how critical that can be to sort of taking a look at what are those efficiencies? How do we track it? And how do we do ongoing reporting? So Kyle, do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then Selena, you can kind of add your thoughts as well.
Yeah. And I think with any data, especially in hospital operations, we're largely when we talk about plant operations, environmental services, we are non-revenue generating departments. That's just the joy of the world we live in. We're the ones that spend all the money, right? And so having that data when we're tracking discharges, we're able to show how long it's taking us to not only clean the room, but then fully disinfect it with that next level. And still, it gives you another avenue to celebrate the hard work that your team's doing, while also the compliant work they're doing. While also when I'm sitting in budget meetings at the end of the fiscal year and talking about, hey, if we, with this data here, you're seeing how many discharges and how many different areas we're being able to treat and disinfect every day. Imagine if we could have, 0.5, one more FTE, two more FTEs. We could be hitting all these other areas and just drive the compliance level up to the standard that we want, or just knock it out of the park with the standards that we've set. I think that data helps for all of those reasons. Budgeting. I'll say this too, Justin, because Selena just touched on it. We live in a world in healthcare now of RCAs, root cause analysis, where anytime that you have an HAI on campus, you have a surgical site infection in the OR, to be able to dive in and get granular data that shows you even the amount of time that ultraviolet was able to be run and hit all those surfaces. It supports exponentially, obviously, the investment of the unit, but also the fact that your policies, your procedures, your staff is running it correctly, and it's working. The data is what helps you truly share with everyone the amount and the level of quality you're providing. And there's not a lot of data out there that can do that. And there's not a lot of technology out there that can celebrate it to the level of detail that a good partner can provide. So I think, it's all encompassing, both from a budgetary, but quality. I think that's the unique part with investing in UV technology, quite frankly.
Selena, what would you add?
Yeah, so the only thing I would really add is there's an advanced optimization where you could do a target analysis. So like for Kyle, he's targeting specific units, but if a hospital didn't know what units they should target, they should be able to do an analysis with a vendor and their science department to try and determine which units would be the most beneficial to target, because you want to mitigate, or you want to help to mitigate pathogen transmission events. That's like our number one priority. And so you want to ensure that you've deployed your technology in those highest acuity areas, right? So where your patients are the most severe, prevent any type of pathogen transmissions there for them. But I do think there are quite a few additional areas where people don't utilize it as much. Looking at a hospital, 500 beds or whatever, you don't really know where you should use it. So having a vendor that will help you kind of do the data analysis for you and then suggest for you to target specific units. And that can change too, right? So as priorities in the hospital change or as things happen, the standard operating plan that you're working with could change annually, right? Being flexible and being able to change that as the needs change, I think is very important.
I think, making sure you're focusing on where you can have the biggest impact and then growing the program outward from there. It just makes so much sense. But, if you're not experienced in using the technology, having a partner to help you figure out where that big impact is going to be, because they have such a specialized focus on having an impact, is definitely another way that I think, you can help customers be successful. And it's what health systems should be asking for from their partner. Kyle, I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it almost rhetorically. Has UV led to tangible benefits for your hospital? And if so, what were they? Absolutely.
And you're right. It is rhetorical, but at the same time, to elaborate, I assure you when I tell you, we've seen partnering with infection control. We all have meetings. We all have different committees, whether they're quality, infection control. We have meetings about meetings anymore in healthcare. So to be able to sit in those meetings, but also share the data that I have, but also the important piece is the quality data that our quality departments provide. And we in healthcare tend to, if we have an issue with something, we throw 15 things at it at once because we just want to fix the problem. And so being able in the past personally to, if we have an issue with C. diff on a unit, as opposed to throwing 15 things at it, let's take a slower approach and let's implement UV and let's go back and look at the results. Okay. If we don't see the increase or the decrease, more importantly, that we want, okay, let's try something else. But I'll tell you, utilizing and implementing UV on a targeted area, as Selena was just talking about, it is very, very, it's a broad statement, but I've never seen an increase in something in a pathogen or a virus once UV is implemented. And so, to take those approach with things and partner with quality, so then they're tracking the data for you while you are also having the user data, putting those together and just, it's an eye opener, and it's been a successful plan of attack for me in the past many, many times.
So what are your main takeaways for supply chain as they're listening today? What do you want to make sure that they understand?
It's not snake oil, but saying that, I think definitely spending the time to getting to know a partner you're interested in, building that relationship on the front end to ensure the support, the data, and the technology is there, I think is something that a supply chain can be involved in from the beginning. And then I also just, ensuring that partner is, I think it's purchasing groups and those kind of things are a big deal in healthcare, especially for small rural hospitals, smaller hospital systems. That is what allows you to, for lack of a better way to put it, compete with the big guys. And I think a lot of when you not only with supply chain, but then you partner with your purchasing group, and if they have partnerships with certain companies, the reason they have those partnerships is they're pretty valid and they have a footprint already out there of support, because it's not easy to become a part of a purchasing group. And so those supply chain folks, if you have vendors and partners on your purchasing group that you can talk to, reach out to them. I think that's another thing. In the past, I felt like I'm more of a salesman than the companies themselves, because I bring it. I bring it to those folks, but I think so many trade shows out there, supply chain, if you're interested in it, reach out yourself. At that point, it's not somebody knocking on your door. And that way it's much easier to ask those questions and kind of set those expectations on the front end to, I don't want it to sound too rude, but demand the partnership that you need. That is way easier to have that conversation on the front end than it is halfway through or on the back end.
Selena, maybe some closing thoughts and comments on that before we wrap up. What would you add for supply chain to make sure it's top of mind?
Yeah. So I think looking for a data scientific backed program, making sure that the program can not only improve, but that you're constantly going to be watching it to move it to where the needs are met. And then, of course, reducing transmission events leading, to long-term, strategic value like downstream costs. We didn't talk about that very much, but, there's a lot of value in reducing some of that. And then, there's been several occasions where a program was stopped for financial reasons or whatever. And then several months later, they'll reach back out and start the program again because of transmission, because of the, due to an increase in transmission events. So I think what Kyle was saying was right on about working together, monitoring the program, ensuring that the entire hospital is on the same page. Hospitals that have a good relationship between environmental service and infection control are the most successful programs. So you have people that are accountable in many different departments that are all working together to ensure that the program is a success. So, working together, everybody.
Justin, just to jump in too, if you don't mind real quick, because I think the last piece that I'd say about supply chain is I've been at many, many different facilities, and I think sometimes in supply chain and some of those behind the house, back of the house departments don't realize the impact that they have on patient care. And from a supply chain perspective, they are literally the gatekeeper for us to provide the care and to provide the service that we provide. And I would just say that just to all the supply chain folks out there listening, it is what you do for us is no different than taking care of the patients directly in the beds each day and their families. And so I think allowing them and helping them get educated on what's out there while also allowing them to learn some for themselves. Because working in a hospital, it's our family, it's our aunties, uncles, mom, dad, kids that are coming to that hospital and truly are the gatekeeper for us being able to do that. So being open-minded and being excited to learn and investigate some of this technology is something I would recommend and always ask. That's the biggest partnership I need with supply chain and appreciate in me doing what I do. So thanks for letting me add that, Justin.
Loved highlighting what effective partnership looks like today, especially after the sale. How do you make sure that what you bought is what gets delivered? So Selena and Kyle, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justin.
All right, that was Kyle Morrison, System Director for Environmental Services and Food and Nutrition, and Selena Pfannstiel, Manager of Customer Success at Xenex. A great conversation wrapping up a 3-part podcast series, the first ever CEC approved podcast on UV technology. And I think the major takeaways today is, great reporting, having a partner who will let you help make the business case for implementing capital technology, the speed to value and value analysis themes in this conversation today, also very supply chain specific and important to think about, especially implementation, staff turnover, ongoing support. Okay, great. We've spent the money on this capital piece of equipment, but how do we continue to get the value? And if we're getting great results, how do we make a case for continuing to expand that? So I think in wrapping up this series, the big final takeaway is the value of integrating UV technology isn't just in the purchase, it's in the service, support, accountability, and the measurable results that follow. I want to thank all of you that has followed us along throughout this 3-part series sponsored by Xenex. And thank you for listening to this series on UV technology here on Power Supply.